evening, everyone out there. Today we will talk about, as I was mentioning in my previous video, about alcohol and what alcohol it's causing, which is not that fun. That means alcohol and its impacts on our health. So, as introduction, I want to explain the pathways that that alcohol is actually traveling into our body. So the pathways that we are going to examine some of various organs and tissues that interacts with along with that way, and we are going to discuss that so delightful feeling called hangover. First and foremost, I have to emphasize the way alcohol, or more properly known as ethanol, which is actually a legitimate toxin, travels through our body. Studies have shown that small amounts of alcohol on a daily consumption can in fact be good for us. Though these studies are quite erratic in comparison to one another, and no one would really claim that alcohol is overall healthy for any of us. Everything that you do with balance is fine. This is my approach, but as we go further in this presentation, I will explain what it can cause, of course. So that's how everything functions. First of all, you passes through the mouth and you ingest it. So the pathway will be the entire inside of the stomach, which is landing, of course, in the stomach, is also lined with mucosal tissue. And that mucosal tissue serves a variety of functions. One of the most important is being actually secrete mucus, and that mucus prevents the stomach acid, or it's also known as hydrochloric acid, from consuming the stomach itself, because the stomach has about 1% of acidity, and it's very high. So alcohol can be absorbed, of course, into the mucosal tissue, and then from there it can get into the bloodstream, first through the liver, and then afterwards it reaches our brain or our head. As a quick overview, when you first drink alcohol or ingest anything, it went into your oral cavity, your mouth. Some of it got absorbed into the mucosal tissues and went directly into your bloodstream, but it was a very small amount. Usually it's a very small amount. After that, we swallow, of course, and it goes to the esophagus, into the stomach, then into the small intestines. The small intestines' job is to absorb all the nutrients, drinks, of course, we do ingest. The intestines are going to send the alcohol or ethanol to the liver first, and afterwards, as I said, to the brain. Actually, our liver, because we forget often about our liver, is a multifunctional supercomputer and is our biggest solid internal organ, if we don't consider the skin, but is a huge organ, and this organ is absolutely remarkable. Our liver has about 500 different functions. One of the coolest properties is that it can regenerate. Most of our body does what is called healing. Healing is a mixture of some regeneration, but mostly this ends up into scarring or scars. The liver is capable of true regeneration, even if most of the time it has to indulge so much abuse, not just by ethanol, nonetheless by anything that we do ingest, of course. There is a myriad of other toxins that get into the digestive tract. The liver tries to detoxify through some really interesting chemistry, but throughout all that abuse, of course, it could take some damage. Our liver is directly connected to our heart through the so-called inferior vena cava, and this is most of the time also a reason why some people have high blood pressure. So again, I'm still staying with the liver because it's a very, very important. Some facts, of course, about this incredible organ. This organ is absolutely vital and for the body's metabolic functions and immune system. So it's everything leads anyway to the immune system. Without a functioning liver, a person cannot survive. The liver produces bile that aids in digestion of fats. It also helps maintain the right level of blood sugar in the body. Liver cells are organized into units called lobules, each with their own blood supply. One of the liver's many jobs is to process and purify the blood, removing, of course, alcohol and any toxins, including byproducts of medication, because medication we could see also as a drug, because many medications are so strong that put especially a lot of work on the liver that has to metabolize everything. So some other facts, of course, of the liver, as I said, is that detoxifying is the biggest detoxifying agent in our body. It detoxifies the harmful things we take in, like alcohol and drugs, and you name it. Without the liver, the body cannot process these items. And when you see a normal liver, it's brownish colors, is actually very dark. And the liver with cirrhosis, it's scars and has not a very pleasant color at all. So, more toxic than alcohol, what could this be? As soon as the alcohol passes into the liver, and this is where it's going to meet with an enzyme called alcohol dehydrogenase. So the stomach has this, by the way, too. With this enzyme, or what this enzyme actually does, it interacts with the ethanol and converts it into something called acetaldehyde. The ironic thing of acetaldehyde is actually more toxic than ethanol itself. And if it's where it was left, then we would have a serious problem if we left just the acetaldehyde as it was. So this enzyme is helping the liver. So fortunately, or luckily, the liver is also going to have another enzyme that can convert that acetaldehyde into something known as acetate. Acetate is actually can be easily get broken and is in a lot of places in our body. So that is, acetate is not really a harm, but acetaldehyde, that is really a huge problem for the body. What can affect after the liver is our brain. The brain is one of the most delicate organs of the body, and needless to say, the most vulnerable to injury. The brain damage from alcohol consumption involves a multiplicity of factors that vary from one person to another. After all this, alcohol is now heading straight for to the brain. Blood is pumping straight to the brain. The most affected region or section of the brain is called prefrontal cortex. Our brain is partially gray matter. This is the outer portion, and then the inner portion, it's the white one. The gray and white matter respectively, the gray matter is where the cells of the brain called neurons are communicating with each other. Imagine billions and billions of connections all happening in just this tiny little area. This is absolutely amazing. It's wonderful what our body does. So the explanation of the effect of alcohol on the brain can be summarized using models developed in the health field. I usually don't do that, but there have been absolutely great studies that can show which parts of the brain get affected by injuries or alcohol or drugs or whatever. So the one that gets most affected is, for example, or the effect is premature aging hypothesis. So this model postulates that alcohol affects the brain centers and is responsible for accelerating the natural chronological aging. So we age faster. The vitamin deficiency, alcohol or alcoholism is associated with poor dietary habits, which in turn results in thiamine, which is actually vitamin B1 deficiency. Inadequate levels of this vitamin cause deep damages within the brain that are largely responsible for severe cognitive deficits. Then we have brain atrophy. So the neurotoxic effects of alcohol on the brain cause the white matter and the cerebral cortex to shrink. Atrophy means shrinking. In addition to this, alcoholism damages portions of the hypothalamus by breaking blood vessels in this area of the brain. So the results is a transient or cognitive deficits from atrophy or shrinking. The next would be the frontal lobe susceptibility. So neuroimaging studies have shown that one of the ways alcohol affects the brain is by disrupting the normal inhibitory mechanisms of the front lobe networks, since this is an area commonly associated with behavioral qualities and problem-solving abilities. Damage to the cells in this region can be absolutely devastating. Another effect on the brain, the so-called neurotransmitters. Neurotransmission is the mechanism responsible for communication between the brain cells. When you study the interaction between alcohol and the brain, you will discover that the effects of alcohol can change the activity, of course, of these neurotransmitters through inhibition or excitation. The quantities of alcohol intake determine the extent of these changes. The two most famous are probably dopamine and serotonin, but there are others, like for example GABA. It's GABA in capital letters, and glutamate that ethanol is also going to affect. The very same which ethanol also is going to affect is the secretion of endorphins. So you see, and I'm not really finished yet, I'm emphasizing a lot on the brain because our brain is very, very important. It's like you have to imagine a control tower. If something goes wrong in the brain, everything in the body will be affected, but in a severe way. So this is the reason why I'm emphasizing or talking more about the brain that can be affected. Brain regions susceptible to alcoholism. So as the blood blood alcohol concentrations, I have to say it this way, increases, its effects on the central nervous system becomes more pronounced. The brain, being a complex system, is absolutely it's a miracle, has specific regions that are more vulnerable to chemical modifications. The following are some of the main regions in the brain system that are more susceptible to alcoholism. This is called mesolimbic pathway. This is also known as the reward pathway. This region is easily stimulated by alcohol. A brain on alcohol releases a chemical, as I said before, known as dopamine, which is responsible for the feeling of pleasure. Since this is the pathway involved with addiction, you will require more alcohol as time goes by to create the same level of satisfaction and pleasure. Then we have the frontal lobe and prefrontal cortex. This part is responsible for problem solving, impulse, inhibition, goal setting, decision making, judgment, social conduct, among other functions. Effects of alcoholism cause this region to shrink and reduce in mass while lowering the number of neurons within the prefrontal cortex. This causes drastic changes in personality and also emotions. Another very important part of the brain, which is called hippocampus. The hippocampus is related with emotions and memories, which are created here, so in this region. It is also plays a key role in anxiety and fear. The interaction between alcohol and brain cells disrupt the growth of new cells, leading to memory loss or lapses, and to some extent as well depression. The hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. These are actually, the hypothalamus is the master gland. The hypothalamus is in control of temperature, learning, and as well here memory, and most importantly hormone regulation. So we go into the endocrinological aspect of the body. So hormone regulation, it is one of a few areas that brings out clearly the long-term effects of alcohol on the brain. It causes deficits in memory and hormonal disruption. But this is the long term. This explains why some recovering alcoholics experience this is known as delirium tremens symptoms. So the hypothalamus and pituitary glands, they form what's known as the hypothalamic pituitary axis. And just understand that these two structures control, as I said before, our hormonal system. The hypothalamus is more or less in charge of the pituitary gland. They secrete hormones, as I said before, but the hypothalamus is constantly monitoring the body. So when you start drinking, the hypothalamus is aware of it, and it's going to start adjusting based off of the ethanol. Basically, it is going to tell the pituitary gland to start commanding around your adrenal glands, and your adrenal glands are what secretes cortisol, which is the stress hormone number one. By the way, also epinephrine and norepinephrine, also known as adrenaline. So the entire endocrinological part of the body, or fight and flight, which is cortisol, gets as well disrupted in a way, or affected. Now we come on the astro-medical part. Neptune is the ruler of drugs, narcotics, poisons, and so on. So addiction is a disorder of the brain's reward system, which arises through transcriptional and epigenetic mechanisms, and occurs over time from chronic high levels of exposure to an addictive stimulus of narcotics and medication and alcohol engagement in sexual intercourse. It's like an overdrive. So general ruler is, as I said, Neptune, also of opium, soporifics, sleep production because it puts you to sleep, hypnotic and stimulants. Um, then narcotics are also partly ruled by Saturn. Is not only, I will come on that in a minute. Um, so since Neptune is in Pisces, which is actually the new ruler, because Jupiter is the ancient ruler of Pisces, and the new one is as well Neptune. So these two could increase whatever sign planets you have, if you have in Pisces, especially the 12th house. And these drugs, doesn't matter what drug, which Neptune is the ruler of, can affect as well the pineal gland, which is ruled by Neptune. And all this use of drugs, cocaine, heroin, opiates, alcohol, and other narcotics, cause a so-called supernormal rate of vibration of the pineal gland, causing in many cases, as I mentioned just previously, delirium tremens and other things. So alcohol and opium or whatever connected to narcotics and drugs habits usually in watery signs, and especially would be the first house, the ascendant, or the 7th, the 6th, or the 12th house. And mostly they are reflected. They usually tend to have this inclination for drink and narcotics. So as I mentioned, Neptune in Pisces especially, but we don't have to forget as well the moon. This is the state of mind or emotional state. The sun is the willpower. Then the north node, which is very similar to Neptune, is a shadow planet of illusion, deception, lower desires, obsessions, passion, apathy as well. Neptune is more escapism. Venus is ruling the essence of addiction, so pleasure, sexual overdrive, and you name it. So since Jupiter now is in Aquarius, went back to in Aquarius, and will, I think by the end of the year, will be again in Pisces. So that means that we might have increased numbers of drugs problems, but this can be also medication, because there are very heavy medication that people take which are addicted to these drugs. I call them drugs. It can be that it could increase by end of the year, especially when they touch each other, Neptune and Jupiter, and these are two massive planets. Actually, Jupiter is the biggest one in our solar system, but it can be a little bit of a headache, and especially for people that are alcoholics. By the way, a note on the brain: the brain can also can regenerate. It's called neuroplasticity. So the brain, if you give time to recover, usually takes more than a year, if not longer, to readjust. The liver is a little bit faster, but the brain takes a long time to readjust. But it can as well be, I don't like the name healing or healed, but it can regenerate, like the liver does as well. So if you can prevent, if you are somebody, or you have somebody in the family or friends that indulge too much of drugs, medication, or alcohol, perhaps you could help them in preventing, or making them aware what they could do, and act accordingly, because as I said, both can be regenerated. I took on purpose the liver because it's the most important internal, or the biggest solid internal organ, which is really connected through the heart, or directly to the heart, and as well always the brain. And our brain is our control tower. So if you have planets in Pisces, which is opposing, of course, how it's called, Virgo, um, and Virgo, it's in charge of the intestines, and part the lower lobe as well of the liver. If you can prevent already in advance, before Jupiter will hit by end of the year again the sign of Pisces, it would be helpful. Especially it's not only Pisces, would be also any sign that is in square with Pisces. That means it's Gemini. Then we have, as I said, Virgo, and then we would have Sagittarius. They are all in the square, especially Virgo, because Virgo is also related to the sixth house of health, but it's not only health. It's not the sixth house is not the house of health per se, but how we treat ourselves also on a daily basis. Because I look also at the 8th house, and I said the 12th house. But especially Virgo, perhaps they should be more aware about what they eat. Try to keep a clean diet, not to eat too much of processed food, and avoid, if you can, alcohol. If you drink it every now and then, it's fine, especially when you with a meal. That is not that you're an alcoholic, not at all. But if somebody in that you might know, or a family member that is struggling with alcohol, perhaps you could be of help as soon as Jupiter also enters Pisces, because it could really increase. Also medication, as I mentioned before. If some things should be unclear, don't hesitate to contact me. I will leave everything in the description box below. I hope that this, or I was able to give a little bit of an overview what it can cause, especially in the brain, and the liver, and of course the entire body, because it's affecting the entire body. It's not just only the head. If the head doesn't function properly, the entire body will suffer. And this beautiful hangover that nobody knows exactly, but we think that because if the reason is acetaldehyde, this enzyme that is causing the hangover. There are remedies, there are different remedies. I have heard so many different ones, and the ones that had it already, they know the best thing is actually to sleep. That helps to recover. Sleep, and also to drink, because otherwise you get dehydrated. This is also one other aspect, and you really get dehydrated, because the kidneys, they are working 180%. And remedies are for everything. It's willpower. It's not easy, and as I said, if you have questions, don't hesitate to contact me. I will prepare another video very soon. I'm not very sure which topic this time I will talk about, but based on the planetary movement, more or less, I will talk about these aspects. So we can prevent, because I'm not here to fear monger anybody. I just want so the people are aware, and to prevent as a prophylaxis. Do it in advance and not in the last minute, because sometimes it's really too much too late, and then it's you can't do that much to help even yourself. Thank you very much for being here, for watching, for sharing and commenting. Stay well, and see you very soon. Goodbye for now.